I'm John Thompson, and this is the Dashboard Effect podcast. My guest today is Lisa Weaver Lambert. Lisa has deep expertise in the field of AI, particularly its applications in business. She is an author, having recently published the AI Value Playbook, How to Make AI Work in the Real World. Lisa worked in AI and capital markets at Microsoft. She was a senior manager at Accenture and advises private equity on due diligence and value creation. Lisa has a track record of helping companies improve operations through data and AI initiatives and strategies, holding executive line management and board positions with some of the world's best-known companies, earning her recognition as a leading woman in technology. Lisa's mission is to equip non-technical leaders with the knowledge and confidence to leverage AI for their organizations. Welcome, Lisa.
Oh, thanks, John. And of course, we met each other when I was working for Microsoft, and you were doing some great work there across private equity companies that I was working with.
Thank you very much. And where are you now?
In Oxford, in the UK.
Oh, nice. Okay, great. Well, let's get into some of the details. Can you tell us more about yourself and your journey into AI?
Of course, John. So I really enjoy patterns, languages and statistics. And I studied languages, then statistics, and then data science. And I cut my teeth in financial services in the credit card industry on acquisition and retention programs, all around data management. And although I found it at times really tedious, it was such a great discipline to learn. And I moved to the US earlier in my career, and I was lucky enough to experience the value of working with really large data sets and how you can use these for analytics to solve real world business problems. I've since, as you mentioned, worked for Microsoft, Accenture, and in private equity. And I've also held executive line management positions for leading brands and served on boards. And I currently serve on the advisory board of Luminalta, which is a custom software development company which serves the PE industry.
Nice. Great resume. So you're an expert on AI, at least in business.
Yes.
Safe to say.
Expert, always learning.
Right. Okay. Excellent. Well, AI is a hot topic. It really promises to usher in a new age for our species, or Armageddon, one of the two. We can't tell if it's arrived or is going to arrive. For most of us citizens, it's really manifested as being able to ask GPT anything or have it write us an email. I'm curious, in doing the research for your book, well, actually, first tell us more about your book. Who's it for? Is it small, medium, enterprise? What's the thesis behind it? Tell us the goal, why you wrote it, that sort of thing.
Great question, John. So who's the book for? Let's start with that question. The book is for non-technical leaders and board members, okay? Because I have seen that sometimes there's a different level of knowledge held by practitioners, technical practitioners, compared to business leaders within companies. And it was really during the COVID pandemic that the idea of the book took shape in my mind. There were two main motives that sort of converged to inspire me. Sort of, first of all, I was working in private equity at that time with limited experience in the sector. And I realized that when I started documenting guidelines on how to work with data, and that, we're not talking about AI at this point, we're just talking about data foundations and so forth, and using relatable case studies. It really helped others grasp the concepts, methods, and helped me move change into private equity much more swiftly. And secondly, I was then working with a CEO who was grappling with digitizing his business and integrating AI into his growth strategy. And he proactively began networking with external leaders to learn more about how he should bring diverse perspectives together and integrate data and AI to scale his company. I started to ask myself how I could actually scale this understanding through human stories, and how do we bring these practices and learnings that can be applied to other organizations. So just going back to, the core motive behind this book is really wanting to equip non-technical leaders with the knowledge and confidence to leverage AI for their organizations. And I wanted to do this through a series of in-depth conversations with practitioners, from CEOs of new generative AI-based companies to data scientists and CFOs in more traditional companies. And the experts that I interviewed, I was really careful to pick out those that would give me candid stories and really discuss their successes and failures and what excites them about the future. So I think that these insights offer really unique perspective on how leaders can apply AI into their organization. And then through this work and research, I also distilled a playbook for how AI can be effectively used today. But just stepping back a minute into your question around the thesis. So I think, while AI offers immense potential, many organizations today still struggle to realize its full value. And we can see that it is integrated into our consumer products very readily. And we can see that it's getting integrated into the new rollout of products coming from Google, coming from Microsoft. And there's an expectation that AI would inevitably create value, but there's a dissonance between the reality of these, let's call them tech giants, compared to most organizations. So I think, look, a lot of these tech companies have been built bottom up with data as their bedrock. AI has been core to their, strategy and core processes for over a decade. And technology innovation is really intrinsic to their business models. So I think there is a paradox around the adoption of AI, but then its actual impact on productivity growth. And that's what I really wanted to get to the heart of, is actually what is creating that gap.
Yeah, that's well said. We've obviously work in data. We work in the mid-market. We've had private equity firms that we work with and mid-market companies place AI as a priority in their strategic objectives for, give it a year, 2024, 25. And so often it's sort of brought in non sequitur. It doesn't start with what's the business objectives and where can AI make that more efficient, but it sort of feels like, let's sprinkle some AI on this thing, some magic pixie dust, see if we can get it going. You interviewed, as you said, a lot of different companies. What are some of the differences that you saw in companies that successfully leveraged AI? What are some of the lessons and notable examples that you could share with us?
Well, the biggest difference isn't whether a company is mid-market or large enterprise or early in its nascence. The biggest difference I found was actually between companies that are cloud native and those that are not. Those that are cloud native are more agile. The smaller the company, actually, so being a mid-market company is a benefit, I think, because they're more focused on a single output. And I think being an established company, there are many challenges already with data foundations, with the operating model, with strategic focus as competing priorities. So actually, I do think it's the bedrock of the technology infrastructure and architecture, which is a key differentiator, and how important it is to use data and then AI to realize the potential of that company, whether that is a priority for the leaders of the company.
So whether a company is embarking on an AI strategy currently or they know it's inevitable, data is the foundation, having good architecture, good governance. You got to start with your data. Is that reasonable?
Look, data quality is absolutely critical. So, I mean, you can't work off poor inputs. It's really, really hard to get value out of poor inputs. And a lot of the new models that we're working with today are working with unstructured data. So there's a lot of work that needs to go into actually getting the right data from whatever formats are coming through. And there are certain formats today that the models are not great at pulling from. And just as an example, so PDFs, they're still not great at pulling data from PDFs. So I think we've still got a ways to go, but um, definitely data quality is a critical component here. But I also think that talent as well is very, very important.
Well,
Um,
tell me about that.
yes.
What's the challenge there? We're always scouting talent in the field of data, not necessarily specifically AI, and it's a hot profession right now. It's a good place to be. It's hard to find. What are these companies that have succeeded with AI? How did they get there? And I read your book, and it's comprehensive as a practical guide for getting there. So it really lays this out in detail. But if you could give us some highlights, that would be great.
So I think one of the challenges I've come against over and over again is businesses underestimate the complexity of integrating AI, and they often consider that hiring a data scientist is going to be a silver bullet to transform the organization and future-proof it. But actually, and I saw this in action when I worked for Microsoft. Multidisciplinary teams outperform individuals and specialized teams because they can handle a variety of use cases. And what I mean by multidisciplinary team, I mean a cross-functional team with software developers, data scientists, and data engineers, but also thinking about business architects. Also, user experience professionals are often underestimated for their value as well. So all skill sets don't come in one person. And I also think that expecting talent today to have knowledge of all these models coming out as well is just not realistic. I think that there needs to be a lot more upskilling in organizations, and I see the ones succeeding are doing that. And in fact, that makes me think about a software company that I interviewed, which has an amazing leader. And when these new LLMs came forth into the open market, he went back to his engineering roots and started to have a look at them with earnest. And he thought his entire company were on board. And he drove an internal, if you will, transformation, as well as a transformation in the products to his customer set, which is in the entertainment industry. So you can imagine how applicable AI is in consumer entertainment. However, he realized that he hadn't brought everybody on board. So I'm seeing that this importance of sort of upskilling members of your business is absolutely critical.
A lot of the mid-market companies we work with have difficulty just putting together a data team, let alone an AI team. What are some of the other options, outsource and so on, when it comes to AI expertise that you're seeing?
So, look, experts are scarce, and that's a good point that you're making. I think there are a number of options. So there are options for companies, obviously, to partner up with a tech scaler that is meeting them where they are. And so some of these tech scalers have industry practices which are excellent to lean on. But I think that companies need to partner up with an ecosystem of more specialized boutique companies in this area, because they're likely to, you want to go where the talent is. And these companies are going to be fast, they're going to be adaptive. For a mid-sized company, you want to count. So a size matching is, in my experience, a very important thing to get right. And the other point that I'd make in terms of selecting partners to work with is that you really want evidence that they've done it before. You don't want just PowerPoint evidence, but you want evidence in the market so that they're not experimenting on your business.
Yeah, that makes a lot of sense. I wanted to ask you about some examples just to help ground us a little bit in how people have used AI or these companies that you interviewed. Could you just give us some general sense of here's where it's being applied? Because I think a lot of business leaders out there feel this pressure to stay at the forefront. They know AI is as much at the forefront as anything, but don't necessarily know, besides maybe chatbots for customer service, where this can be applied. I'm curious about some of the interesting examples that you've found out there.
Yeah. So I think is your ask around the application of LLMs rather than other AI techniques, or are you interested in both?
Yeah, both.
Okay. Okay. So in terms of LLMs, and I'll get into an example, but I think, where they're really proven is where we've got examples. So in summarization, in analysis, in generating and translating and transcribing. So that's why we've got those examples in customer service. But I'm going to talk about an example of knowledge retrieval, because I think that is an amazing example of where they really perform well, and where we as humans are sometimes not able to, bring the best out of all the sort of history that we might have in a company or in a knowledge base or in very scattered and fragmented knowledge. And then I'll also give an example of vision, AI, and how that's being used in a company. And so the first example is actually in healthcare. Okay. And this company, what they do, it's basically they train as an education platform people who are using ultrasounds, and it's called SonoSim, and they needed a scalable mechanism for end users to actually increase the speed at which they're educated. What I mean by that is actually how do they calibrate and optimize these ultrasound machines. And they were previously relying on legacy search, which is great because it's fairly accurate. However, it yields a very long list of results, and then you have to sift through the results, etc. So it's really not pragmatic for people who are walking around with their cell phones. And this content repository spanned 9,000 or more pages of text. That's 300 textbooks, 5,000 images, 4,000 video clips, and on, and it keeps growing. And they needed a mechanism to query this. And so they worked with a company that supported them with retrieval augmented generation on their generative AI platform. And it's Vectara, the company that they worked with, to develop a natural language search for these ultrasound professionals. And now they're able to access the training and facts on the ground, delivering them a very personalized learning experience that overcame sort of previous. I mean, you just couldn't do that previously, financially, linguistically, logistically. And there's just a great quote from SonoSim, which says, actually, the technology wasn't the key. At the heart of it is the data that we have, all the manuals, all the advice from experts on how to tune these machines, all that kind of stuff they have in documentation. And that's the power of being able to get to that knowledge that was not accessible before.
Yeah, nice. The big area that we see for application, very specific to our world, which is descriptive and prescriptive analytics for a company, the scoreboards, the dashboards that they use to run their day-to-day, is generative analytics. So instead of the somewhat arduous process of getting with a subject matter expert, a VP of sales or CEO or whomever, and understanding what are the outcomes that are most important to you, what are the biggest risks and opportunities there, how are we going to measure your value creation and growth, and then can we work upstream to see what are the leading indicators that most predict those outcomes, who do those map to, and what do we need to put in front of them so that they have the visibility and instrumentation to adjust what they're doing. You can get there, and it's sort of forever iterating and evolving that. But being able to ask your data, who are our customers most likely to churn, which ones are most ripe for cross-selling, where are the markets that we're not yet exploring and could be, those kinds of things, and drilling down to the nuances that really are the levers that drive growth and drive profitability. That generative analytics, we think, is where the future is. It was sort of promised 2 years ago. Microsoft put on a very splashy presentation. I imagine it was somewhat curated because we're still waiting for that to be viable. But it all comes down to, if your data is bad, first of all, if you don't have good data entry compliance, or if people just aren't following processes because there's not a good payout or there's not good accountability for those because we're not looking at the data, you're not going to get anywhere. So it starts with getting your data in one place, seeing it clearly, and then letting that drive process reengineering and accountability and compliance throughout the organization so your data starts to become much more reliable. That typically is the first 6 to 12 months for us, just getting a company so their data is in one spot and it's reliable. Once you've got that, then we're waiting for that machine that'll allow us to do that generative analytics. And even between those two is the semantic layer. How do you translate all this data to something that means or makes sense of this data, of this business model? So aligning the data with the business model. Do you have any, and I don't mean to put you on the spot, it's not exactly in your book, but any thoughts on this generative analytics promise that's coming? When it will be here, how it looks, that sort of thing?
I'm not going to put my finger on timing, but I think we will get there. But my experience is that we are solving problems effectively that are defined in a narrow way. Okay, so if you're talking about retention, then really narrowing down on that problem. And I've worked with a PBAC company on, I mean, the mission was, how do we curate our enterprise data, which is actually what you're suggesting. Now that was started by saying, right, let's get a customer profitability model working, because we have to understand our complex global organization and the cost to serve our customers, given the variety of products we have. And in terms of doing that, it required rethinking how people operate in the business as well, and what's important. And it has been, to pick up on your words, iterative, very iterative. But having that single focus enabled the traction and the move in the right direction. So I am very supportive of organizations wanting to get their enterprise data into one place. But I do think that sometimes, depending on the size and complexity, can take some time. And you were talking about a year, and that sounds like that's a reasonable time frame. But people in business are impatient for results. And I think it's much more successful to work on something that people get up thinking about. It's part of how that company is going to grow or what's holding it back. So doing something that is meaningful, but getting the right scope around what you're doing is important.
Yeah, that's the recurring theme of your book. You can't, again, sprinkle AI. You've got to have a use case that's acute and that has visceral value to the organization. That will begin to drive the progress. And we found that same thing. People can't wait around 6 months while things are happening below the surface. You've got to produce something, and that will.
What I'm hearing, John, in larger organizations is that, a lot of money has been thrown at large teams working with AI, and there, is a steady graveyard of AI experiments going on. Now, the people who've made these products or experiments possible are obviously getting frustrated, but that for me tells me there's a complete disconnect between the people who are leading the organization and these endeavors, and that's expensive. And I think we're going to see somewhat of a or we are already seeing somewhat of a backlash against that. So experimentation is important as long as it's focused and measured, and failure is quick.
Yeah, yeah. It's sort of bringing together that future grand vision and infinite potential of AI, and tying it back down to a very practical, real dollar value that you can get started with. What are some of the biggest mistakes that you saw in interviewing these different companies? Where did companies get off track in terms of their methodology and approach? And again, your book outlines methodology in very practical how-to format. Where did you see people get off the track, and what are some of the pitfalls to look for?
So there was quite a lot of consistency, and I'll bring that out for enterprise and private equity, because I think that, in the mid-market private equity, there's been, somewhat of a skepticism around AI, but I think skepticism is healthy. So I think that is good. But, it can be very risky, actually, investing in AI. And as you and I have been discussing, the ROI sometimes just has a bunch of question marks behind it. I think we've talked about talent, and finding the right talent can be challenging and expensive, and retaining it. There are ethical considerations that need to be taken into consideration. There are integration challenges. This can be very complex and time consuming. And then there are regulatory risks as well, depending on which market the business is in. But I want to bring an example to this, actually. So there was one example, and I have it in the book, and I thought, shall I include it or not? And I thought, no, I need to include it, because it's a really good example of where not being aligned to the business priorities, and actually not working out how the change is going to manifest, then it doesn't matter how much intelligence you put into the solution, the outcome will never work. And this example was actually in the world of traffic monitoring. It was a new regulation we had implemented in London around lorries having to go on certain roads and not in small roads. And as you know, sort of traffic violation is fairly easy when a camera's there and it takes a picture of your car and sends you that with a timestamp. There's not much discussion. The evidence is there. Now, the trick here was that actually, the smaller roads don't all have cameras on them and so forth. So this was all backwards. And AI is a lot of probability in terms of its outcome, and the law doesn't function with probabilities. So the engineers, around this project, I mean, they did extensive research on how they could actually, monitor traffic flows, buy the right data from different data sources. They built up a curve to, decide, when John probably violated the traffic rule, but probably doesn't stand up in court. So I think, sometimes we can get caught up in the excitement of the engineering solution and not think about the practicality of that and how that's going to get applied in a real situation. And government officials don't like to work with probabilities, and even business leaders feel sometimes uncomfortable with those types of outcomes.
Yeah, you need to be thinking about the practical impact first and work your way back, not start with the esoteric piece of let's get this AI thing going. One of the reasons that I enjoy working with private equity is they need to remain at the cutting edge. If they can't fall behind. The whole objective is for the given industry or sector they're working in that they can outperform the market. How should they be thinking about AI as they consider not wanting to miss the bus or be late to the train or whatever metaphor you want? What should be their mindset and approach to AI currently, in your view? And that's typically middle market.
So I mean, I don't see. I have a different perspective on this. So I don't see private equity as being cutting edge in technology. I think they're fast adopters. I think they're ruthlessly pragmatic. And I think those are all good qualities to hold on to. And I think, there's a big difference between saying no to something rather than watching how it's going to evolve and then seizing the right opportunity. And I think that, look, I see AI as part of the technology strategy and roadmap. And it should be built, questions need to be built into the diligence, and the right questions need to be asked at the investment committee. And I think it's around making very deliberate choices. What are you going to spend your money on? What are the priorities for this company? And there are companies, that we know in the mid-market that are software or SaaS businesses. And then AI is highly applicable to low-hanging efficiency in those companies. When you move into industries like insurance, again, that industry has moved very, very fast. There's very easy, case knowledge, customer service. It's all applicable. When you're moving into manufacturing, you have to be very careful around the knowledge, the intrinsic knowledge that is within the staff within those types of companies. And I've seen some resistance there. And I think where private equity companies need to be really careful is, look, it is very attractive to have that equation of, I invest in AI, I take out people. Okay, that's an easy Excel. Yeah. However, I have seen the importance of, what we call knowledge or human in the loop, expertise in the loop, in terms of working with AI. And I would be careful about talent pipelines in companies as well, because obviously there is less talent in a mid-market type company, and you want to make sure that company has a healthy pipeline of people going through.
Yeah, great. All right, thank you. Who should be buying your book and why? I have my own thoughts on it, but would love to hear yours.
Yeah, no, I'd love to have your thoughts as well. So it is written for, as I said, non-technical people who are curious about understanding how AI is actually being implemented and what the stages look like for different companies and where companies are stuck as well. And I think that's really important to get to grips with, and how long it takes and actually how much investment it takes as well. So anybody who's wanting these practical examples to expand, outside of the curated marketing messages around AI. I deliberately didn't want to have shiny stories in the book. I wanted to have real stories in the book. So what do you think, John? I'm very curious to hear
Amy,
your
that's
views.
essentially it. The challenge that I see for executives is, you understand there's this tidal wave somewhere out there of AI. Your general understanding is generative tools like GPT and chatbots. You have a sense that it's good for image sorting and recognition and pattern recognition, but then you think about your company, a manufacturing company or a field services company or what have you, and there's this massive chasm. I just don't see how those two connect. But in your book, you bring forth the practical applications of many companies you've talked to, and also the framework around governance, around how do you step into an AI initiative so that it remains practical and impactful, and so that you have pilot projects that show results early and often, and so that you bring people along in this culture of, if you will, AI. So it's not threatening. They're not worried about losing their job. You're upskilling. You're putting humans in the loop. That sort of thing. So it takes this, this world of, like you say, marketing messages or clickbait articles and so on, and helps to bring it down to the ground. What is this thing really in practical terms in business? So for executives that want to stay up to speed with what is probably the greatest revolution in technology that we're confronted with right now, this is a great place to get their feet on the ground. So I think it's good for that. I'm curious what you think AI holds for us in the future, and whether that scares or excites you, or in what ways. The whole Skynet specter and our overlords and those sorts of things. It almost sounds like you're catering to them in the book. But on a very very practical business level. So I'm being facetious, because but certainly it's embracing the potential of AI in your book. I'm curious how you see it overall in the big picture, since you spent so much time in this world, in this field.
Look, I try and avoid futuristic thinking because I think there's just so much noise out there, John. I think there's more value to be had in understanding what's available right now. I try and avoid the rumors and stay close to the releases. And I think, staying close to the releases allows you to understand what's on the edge. And I think a lot of this technology, it looks like it could be far away, when you're not in one of these big tech companies. But actually, it's a lot closer because it's going to sort of move in gradual increments. I think what actually scares me is the speed of the development. And that came across from every company leader I interviewed. And I think perspective of speed is interesting because it was perhaps less so in the large enterprises than in those companies on the forefront. And certainly, when I worked for Microsoft, the speed was palpable. It was there. And look, I think the latest book from Yuval Harari makes a strong case for the challenge of speed in his recent book Nexus. So we as humans need time to adapt and understand this technology and the impact of businesses and society. The loss of expertise and knowledge is what worries me. Not the technology itself, because I can see that in the application, all the errors are through human bias, not the technology itself. It's how it's applied. So, just going back to the fact that, technological progress doesn't arrive in a disruptive moment, but arrives in these minor innovations or releases, if you will. And I think this often makes it difficult to foresee the overall impact. But, I think, we will see things quite differently stepping back, 5 years' time.
Yeah, I think we'll see. It feels slow when you're in the midst of it, but then suddenly you get, 4.0 or that 1.0 release where you're talking quite naturally to the AI. I mean, or I've listened to AI generated podcasts with two people speaking, and it sounds like the most fluid, natural. These are the kind of people you want to invite over for dinner, and they're not real. Those kinds of things give you a start. I love your statement. You stay closer to the releases than the rumors. I'm gonna borrow that if you don't mind. I really appreciate your time, Lisa. It's been such a pleasure getting to know you and reading your book. Tell me or tell us where people can find you.
LinkedIn is a good place for now. So I would start there. I used to host a podcast as well with Alex Agran on, it's called the Technology Private Equity Podcast. That's still available for people who want to listen to previous copies.
Great, and we'll have contact information in our show notes. Thank you again from
Thank you,
across the
John.
pond. Yeah, we'll talk soon.